They called her the sweetheart of America, the perfect girl who turned heartbreak into art. But beneath the sequins and the stadium lights, Taylor Swift was fighting a war, not just against critics, lovers, and industry giants, but against the story the world wrote for her. She was the teenager who stormed Nashville with nothing but a notebook and a dream. She became the global superstar who sold out arenas and shattered every record in pop history. And yet, behind the choreography of fame was a woman constantly forced to reinvent herself, a phoenix burning, rebuilding, and burning again. In 2009, a single interruption on stage changed her life forever. In 2016, a single word, snake, became a weapon the world used to tear her down. And by 2023, the same word became her crown, a symbol of vengeance and rebirth. Taylor Swift isn't just a pop star. She is a mirror reflecting the chaos of celebrity, the hunger of the media, and the cost of surviving in an industry that feeds on emotion. This is not the story of a singer. It's the story of a woman who turned pain into power, who built an empire on her own scars, and who proved that even when the world cancels you, you can come back stronger than ever. This is the many lives of Taylor Swift, from America's sweetheart to the Queen of Shadows. Taylor Swift's story began far from the noise of fame, in West Reading, Pennsylvania, where discipline and ambition were family values. Born in 1989, she grew up in a home that valued precision. A stockbroker father, a marketing executive mother, both quietly molding a child who absorbed structure but longed for chaos. From an early age, Taylor showed a fixation on words. At 10, she was already writing poems that won national contests. That instinct, turning emotion into language, became her signature long before she held a guitar. At 11, she took her first trip to Nashville, clutching a demo CD and a belief that raw talent could break through corporate glass. Every label rejected her. But rejection became a ritual, one that hardened her resolve instead of breaking it. When she was 12, a family friend taught her a few guitar chords. That moment rewired her life. Within months, she was writing songs with the precision of a storyteller twice her age. She didn't write to entertain, she wrote to prove she existed. In 2003, RCA Records signed her to a development deal. It was short-lived. They wanted her to wait, to grow, to become what the market demanded. She walked away instead. That decision, to leave a major label at 14, defined her entire career. Never let anyone else decide the tempo. Her parents recognized that defiance as destiny. The Swifts moved to Hendersonville, Tennessee, just outside Nashville, so their daughter could chase what most called impossible. Within a year, she was performing in cafes, writing obsessively, and building a portfolio of songs that felt too mature for her age. By 15, Taylor had secured a deal with Big Machine Records, not through connections, but through persistence. In an industry built on timing, she forced the clock to move. The girl who had once been turned away by every label was now standing at the gates of Nashville, not as a dreamer, but as a disruptor. Taylor Swift's debut album, released in 2006, was the arrival of a new archetype, the teenage songwriter who turned her diary into an industry. While Nashville clung to its traditional, male-dominated formulas, Swift delivered a perspective the genre had ignored, the emotional complexity of a teenage girl. Her lyrics were specific, raw, and unfiltered, an authenticity that country music hadn't seen in years. The album reached #1 on the Billboard Country Albums chart and produced hits like Teardrops on My Guitar and Our Song. Each single was both confession and strategy. Simple enough for radio, sharp enough for emotional impact. Critics saw innocence, audiences heard truth. With Fearless in 2008, she no longer needed to prove herself. She dominated. The record exploded commercially, selling millions worldwide and making Taylor the youngest artist ever to win the Grammy for Album of the Year. Love Story and You Belong With Me crossed over into pop radio, redefining the boundaries between genres. Nashville didn't own her anymore, she had outgrown it. But while Fearless made her a star, it also marked the birth of the Taylor Swift mythology, a cycle of heartbreak, publicity, and reinvention. Every song became a headline, every breakup a business model. Taylor wasn't just selling music, she was selling access to her emotions. It was a blueprint few artists dared to follow and none could replicate. By 20, she had transformed from prodigy to phenomenon. But success in her world was never permanent. The higher she rose, the more the world wanted to see her fall. By the early 2010s, Taylor Swift had become more than a chart-topping artist, she was a global empire built on precision and vulnerability. Speak Now and Red marked her evolution from a Nashville darling into an international force. She wrote every lyric on Speak Now herself, a move that silenced anyone who still doubted her authorship. The album sold over 1 million copies in its first week, proving that authenticity could still outperform hype. Red pushed her further into pop territory. Songs like We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together and I Knew You Were Trouble blurred genre lines, creating a new hybrid sound that every label in Los Angeles tried to imitate. Swift was no longer following trends, she was creating them. But her growing dominance came with a price. The media turned her love life into spectacle, branding her as the girl who only writes about her exes. What had once been praised as emotional honesty was now weaponized against her. Late-night hosts joked, tabloids dissected every appearance, and the internet began to turn her name into a punchline. Still, Taylor refused to retreat. She turned the ridicule into ammunition. In interviews, she smiled through questions meant to humiliate her. On stage, she doubled down, performing with the conviction of someone fully aware that she was being watched, judged, and underestimated, all at once. Her transition from country to pop wasn't an accident. It was self-preservation. With 1989 and 2014, she erased the last trace of her old identity. The album was sleek, ambitious, and unapologetically modern, a controlled explosion of hooks, visuals, and branding. It sold over 10 million copies worldwide, won Album of the Year at the Grammys, and established her as one of the most powerful names in music. Taylor Swift had mastered fame, but fame, by nature, doesn't like to be mastered. The empire she built from vulnerability was about to be tested by the very machinery she had conquered. Fame had crowned her, but it also came with enemies. In 2009, at the MTV Video Music Awards, a 19-year-old Taylor Swift stood on stage to accept her first VMA when Kanye West interrupted her speech. The moment became instant pop culture history, the wide-eyed girl robbed of her victory on live television. The world sympathized, but the wound left something deeper than embarrassment. It marked the beginning of a decade-long public war. Years later, when Kanye released Famous with the lyric, "I made that bitch famous," the wound reopened, this time, sharper, dirtier, and far more public. Kim Kardashian leaked an edited phone call, framing Taylor as a liar. Within hours, #TaylorSwiftIsOverParty trended worldwide. She was called manipulative, fake, and fragile, the internet's perfect villain. The woman once adored for her vulnerability was now branded as deceitful. Memes replaced praise, and snake emojis flooded her social media. The press, once her stage, became her courtroom. For the first time in her career, Taylor vanished. No public appearances, no social media, no interviews. The silence lasted nearly a year, a lifetime in celebrity terms. When she finally returned, it wasn't as America's sweetheart. It was as her own myth. The snakes that had once been used to mock her became her symbol. In 2017, she released Reputation, an album built like a battle cry. Its message was clear: you can't kill what you didn't create. The record debuted at #1 in over 100 countries. Her tour broke box office records, grossing more than any North American stadium tour in history. Taylor had weaponized her humiliation. The world had buried her, and she'd turned her own grave into a throne. But behind the triumph, another war was brewing, one that would test not just her image, but her ownership, her art, and her right to her own name. The public feud had forced Taylor Swift to rebuild not just her image, but her foundation. After Reputation, she emerged sharper, self-aware, and unafraid to confront the system that profited from her pain. What came next wasn't just a comeback, it was a reclamation. When Taylor left Big Machine Records in 2018, she believed she was closing a chapter. But when Scooter Braun's company acquired the label, and with it, the master recordings of her first 6 albums, she realized her past had been sold without her consent. For an artist who had built her career on authorship, this was more than business. It was theft. Her response was revolutionary. Instead of pleading, she acted. Taylor announced she would re-record every album she had lost, releasing Taylor's version. Editions to reclaim her art, note by note, lyric by lyric. It was both a legal and emotional rebellion, an artist turning the industry's own machinery against itself. The strategy worked. Fearless, Taylor's version, and Red, Taylor's version, topped charts globally, with fans and fellow musicians rallying behind her. She had transformed a private battle into a public statement. Ownership is power, and power can be taken back. While many expected her to retreat after Reputation, Taylor pivoted instead. Lover in 2019 reintroduced her softer side, a celebration of color and light after years of black and white warfare. Then came the pandemic, and 2 surprise albums that rewrote her artistry completely. Folklore and Evermore abandoned pop spectacle for quiet storytelling. They proved what her critics had long denied: she didn't need headlines to be heard. The albums earned her another Grammy for Album of the Year, her third, an achievement shared by legends like Sinatra and Stevie Wonder. But more importantly, they restored her creative independence. Taylor Swift was no longer chasing the industry. The industry was chasing her. Her comeback was not explosive, it was surgical. Every move precise, every message deliberate. The same woman who once cried on stage was now negotiating billion-dollar deals and redefining what it meant to be an artist in control. She had turned survival into strategy, and strategy into legacy. By the 2020s, Taylor Swift had evolved beyond celebrity. She was no longer just a performer, she was an institution, a self-sustaining economy that moved culture, commerce, and conversation. Every release, every appearance, every word was calculated yet deeply human, transforming her into something few artists ever achieve: cultural infrastructure. Her era's tour became the ultimate symbol of that transformation. What began as a concert series turned into an economic phenomenon. Tickets sold out in minutes, sparking global chaos and government scrutiny of Ticketmaster's monopoly. The tour grossed over $1 billion, with economists noting measurable boosts to local economies. Hotels, restaurants, and airlines adjusted prices around her show dates. The phrase, "the Taylor Swift effect," entered financial reports, not just headlines. But her impact extended beyond money. She reshaped how artists interact with fans, not through distance, but through intimacy. Taylor embedded coded messages in her posts, lyrics, and videos, creating a shared language between her and her audience. Every hint, every Easter egg, every album color palette became part of a puzzle that millions were eager to solve. She wasn't just performing music, she was directing an interactive cultural game that blurred the line between artist and listener. Her influence also altered how the industry treated artistry itself. After her public battle over masters, younger musicians began renegotiating contracts with ownership clauses inspired by her defiance. Even corporate giants like Apple and Spotify shifted payment structures following her protests. Taylor had done what few musicians ever dared: she forced billion-dollar companies to change their ethics. At 33, she became one of the few women in history to reach billionaire status solely through music. No makeup brand, no fashion line, just the value of her words and the loyalty of her audience. She had proven that emotional honesty, when paired with strategic precision, could be the most profitable business model in entertainment. Taylor Swift had turned the vulnerability that once endangered her into the very thing that secured her legacy. Her story was no longer about fame, it was about permanence. Today, Taylor Swift is both the story and the storyteller, a rare figure who commands global attention without being consumed by it. She stands at the intersection of art, influence, and endurance. A living reminder that reinvention isn't a survival tactic, it's an act of power. Her journey from the small-town songwriter to a billion-dollar cultural empire is not a tale of luck, but of precision, the refusal to remain who the world expected her to be. Every reinvention, every comeback, every lyric has been part of a larger design, to prove that control and authenticity can coexist in an industry built on manipulation. And perhaps that's the secret to her staying power. Taylor doesn't chase the spotlight anymore, she bends it. She has learned that fame, at its core, is a transaction, and she is the only artist who rewrote its terms without losing herself in the process. Behind the love songs, the headlines, and the spectacle, there is one consistent truth. Taylor Swift turned vulnerability into strategy, emotion into empire, and survival into art. In a culture obsessed with tearing down what it worships, she remains untouchable, not because she escaped the storm, but because she learned to conduct it. Taylor Swift isn't just a pop star. She is a blueprint, for ambition, for reinvention, for ownership. And long after the noise fades, the myth of Taylor Swift will remain, echoing through every artist who dares to take back their story.